I wasn't looking for another woman. That's a lie. I was actively avoiding them. I was avoiding everyone, but women especially. Women were the source of the fire that had burned my previous life to the ground, leaving behind nothing but the bitter scent of smoke and the fine gray ash of regret. So I'd run. I'd run from the glittering city, from the ambitious career, from the friends who took sides, and most of all, from the ghost of Chloe, whose name still felt like a shard of glass under my tongue. I'd found refuge here, in this small, sleepy town, in a bookstore called The Last Page. It was a fittingly dramatic name for the end of a chapter I desperately wanted to close. The store was a sanctuary of silence and the holy scent of decaying paper. My job was simple: shelve books, work the register, and speak as little as possible. For 3 months, it was perfect. I was a ghost among ghosts, a quiet curator of other people's stories, my own safely locked away. My boss, Mr. Abernathy, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of tweed and gentle sighs, mostly left me alone. My world had shrunk to the width of a bookshelf, and I was content with the confinement. I was safe. Then Lena arrived. She didn't so much arrive as materialize, appearing one Tuesday morning behind the counter as if she'd been grown from the floorboards overnight. Mr. Abernathy introduced her with a vague wave of his hand. "Alara, this is Lena. She'll be helping out. Show her the ropes." And then he retreated to his office, leaving me with her. She was quiet, not in the wounded, hiding way I was, but in a way that seemed deliberate and calm, like a deep, still pool of water. She had dark, wavy hair pulled back in a loose knot that seemed perpetually on the verge of escape, and her eyes were the color of moss after a rainstorm. She wore a simple gray sweater that looked impossibly soft, and when she smiled, a small, hesitant thing, it didn't quite reach her eyes, but it settled in the space between us like a held breath. My first thought, a visceral, unwelcome jolt, was dangerous. Not because she seemed threatening, but because she seemed kind. Kindness was a door I had nailed shut. "Hi," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, smooth and even. "Nice to meet you." "You too," I managed, my own voice sounding rusty and unused. I immediately turned away, busying myself with a stack of new arrivals, the sharp corners of the hardcovers digging into my palms. I could feel her presence behind me, a quiet weight in the dusty air. I started explaining the inventory system, my words clipped and efficient, a verbal wall against whatever she was. I pointed to the sections: fiction, history, the surprisingly robust poetry corner. I showed her how to use the ancient cash register, a relic that probably remembered the moon landing. Through it all, she just listened, her gaze steady and attentive. She didn't interrupt with questions. She just absorbed the information, her head tilted slightly. The scent of her drifted over the counter, something warm and earthy like sandalwood and vanilla, mixed with the clean, crisp smell of old paper. It was a scent that felt like it belonged here, and the thought irritated me more than I could say. She was fitting in too easily. I had worked hard to make this place my fortress of solitude, and she had just walked in without even knocking. I resolved, with a grim certainty that felt achingly familiar, to keep her at arm's length. She was just a coworker. That's all she would ever be. The first few weeks were a study in polite avoidance. I took the opening shifts. She took the closing ones. When we overlapped for an hour in the middle of the day, I'd find a task in the far corners of the store, losing myself in the dusty archives of the basement or meticulously organizing the travel section, a small, bitter irony. We spoke only when necessary. "Can you cover my lunch?" "The delivery is here." "Mr. Abernathy wants the new releases displayed by noon." Our conversations were transactional, stripped of any personal detail. I learned nothing about her, and I offered nothing of myself. It was a carefully constructed piece, and for a while, it worked. But the last page was a small world. It was impossible to ignore someone completely. When the entire space was barely the size of a two-bedroom apartment, I started noticing things against my will. The way she handled the books, her long, graceful fingers tracing the worn spines with a reverence I recognized. She treated them not as merchandise, but as artifacts, each with its own history. I once saw her spend 10 minutes carefully taping a torn page in a secondhand copy of 100 Years of Solitude, her brow furrowed in concentration. There was a patience in her hands that I found both fascinating and unnerving. She had a quiet laugh, a low chuckle that she'd try to stifle when she read something amusing in a book she was shelving. It was a sound like stones tumbling in a slow-moving stream, and every time I heard it, a muscle in my jaw would tighten. It was too pleasant. It was a crack in the silence I had so carefully cultivated. I learned that she drank her tea black from a chipped ceramic mug with a poorly painted owl on it. She'd hold it with both hands, warming them, her gaze lost somewhere in the middle distance. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression unreadable. The moment our eyes met, she'd look away, not with embarrassment, but with a placid sort of retreat, as if she were merely observing the wildlife and didn't want to startle it. I was the startled wildlife. Every glance felt like a question I didn't want to answer. My internal monologue became a relentless, exhausting battle. Don't look at her. Stop thinking about the way her hair catches the light from the front window. It doesn't matter that she remembered you, like Russian literature, and set aside a new translation of Dostoevsky. It's just a nice gesture. It means nothing. Chloe had been full of nice gestures at first, too. They were the bait, the beautiful, shimmering lure that hid the sharpness of the hook. I had bled for months trying to get that hook out. I wasn't going to bite again. One afternoon, a customer, a flustered-looking man in a suit, was being particularly difficult, demanding a book he couldn't name by an author whose name he'd forgotten. "It's blue," he insisted, waving his hands vaguely. "And it's about, you know, things." I was on the verge of telling him exactly where he could shelve his things when Lena stepped in. "Was it a recent bestseller?" she asked, her voice calm and even. "Hardcover? Maybe with a bird on the cover?" The man's face lit up. "Yes, a bird, a crow, I think." Lena led him to the new fiction table and placed the exact book in his hands. He left, beaming. She turned back to the counter, not looking at me, and started quietly wiping it down with a cloth. "You're good at that," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. They sounded grudging. She glanced up, a faint ghost of a smile on her lips. "My mother was a librarian. I grew up with people who knew what they wanted, but not what it was called." It was the first piece of personal information she had ever offered. A small, smooth stone dropped into the still water between us. I should have ignored it. I should have grunted a non-committal response and walked away. Instead, I found myself asking, "Is she still a librarian?" "No," Lena said, her gaze dropping back to the counter. "She passed away a few years ago." The air shifted. The casual revelation hung there, heavy and real. It wasn't a play for sympathy. It was just a fact, stated plainly. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's okay. It's been a while." She looked up at me then, her moss-green eyes holding mine for a beat too long. "It's why I like places like this. They smell like her office." And just like that, the wall I had built around myself developed a hairline fracture. She had given me a reason, a small, sad, beautiful reason for her being here. It was a piece of her story, offered freely. My own story felt heavy and ugly in my chest. I turned away, retreating to the safety of the history section. But the image of her face, the quiet grief in her eyes, followed me into the stacks. The fortress was still standing, but I was suddenly acutely aware of how lonely it was inside. Our forced proximity deepened. Mr. Abernathy, in a rare fit of managerial ambition, decided the store needed a complete inventory check, a task that hadn't been done in over a decade. It meant late nights, long hours, and the two of us, alone, surrounded by towering shelves of silent books. The store at night was a different entity. The familiar, comforting space became intimate, hushed. The only sounds were the scratching of our pens on clipboards, the soft thud of a book being placed back on a shelf, and the hum of the old radiator. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in our bubble of paper and ink. It was during these nights that I truly began to see her. Freed from the distraction of customers and the bright light of day, my observations became more focused, more intense. I watched the way she moved, with an economy of motion that was almost like a dance. She never seemed rushed or flustered, even when we discovered a whole section of mislabeled philosophy texts that would take hours to sort. She just sighed, a small puff of air, and said, "Well, I guess Nietzsche is spending the night with Plato. Let's get them sorted." Her humor was as quiet as the rest of her, dry and understated, and it ambushed me every time. I learned her tells. When she was tired, she'd rub the back of her neck with her left hand. When she was concentrating, a tiny frown line would appear between her eyebrows. And when she was genuinely amused, her smile would finally, fully reach her eyes, crinkling the corners and transforming her entire face. It was a rare and brilliant sight, like catching a glimpse of the sun on a perpetually overcast day. I found myself cataloging these details like they were rare first editions. Her scent, the sandalwood, vanilla, and paper, was a constant presence, a warm, grounding aroma that I started to associate with a feeling I refused to name. It felt too much like peace. One night we were working in the stuffy, cramped basement, surrounded by boxes of donated books that smelled of dust and time. We were tasked with sorting them into keep and donate again piles. It was tedious, back-breaking work. I was tired, not just from the long hours, but a deep, soul-level exhaustion that had been my constant companion for a year. I dropped a heavy box of encyclopedias, and instead of a crash, there was just a dull, defeated thud. I didn't even have the energy to curse. I just sank down onto a stack of old magazines and put my head in my hands. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I expected her to say something practical, like, take a break, or to just ignore me and keep working. Instead, she came and sat on a box a few feet away from me. She didn't speak for a long time. She just sat there, a quiet, solid presence in the dim light. The only sound was the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness. "You look like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders," she said finally, her voice soft. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh into my palms. "Just my corner of it, it's heavier than it looks." "I know the feeling," she said. I looked up at her. Her face was half in shadow, her expression gentle. There was no pity in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. And in that moment, something in me broke. Not a loud, shattering break, but a quiet, internal splintering. The careful control I maintained over my own story began to fail. "I used to be a lawyer," I blurted out, the words tasting strange in my mouth. I hadn't said them aloud in months. In the city, corporate litigation, I had a corner office with a view of the park, a life. She listened, her gaze unwavering. She didn't ask the obvious question. "So what are you doing here?" She just waited. "I blew it all up," I continued, the confession a painful release. "Or someone blew it up for me. And I let them." I was talking around the edges of it, circling the truth. I was talking about Chloe, the all-consuming, possessive, brilliant, and ultimately destructive woman I had loved. The woman who had convinced me that her jealousy was passion, that her control was care. The woman who, when I finally tried to leave, had made it her mission to ruin me, professionally and personally, with a series of calculated lies and betrayals that had left me with nothing. "It sounds like you needed a change of scenery," Lena said, her voice a balm on the raw wound of the memory. "I needed to disappear," I corrected her, my voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to find a place where no one knew my name." "And did you?" she asked. I looked around the dusty basement, at the forgotten stories piled up to the ceiling. "Yeah," I said, a wave of profound sadness washing over me. "I did." She was quiet for a moment, then she stood up and held out a hand to me. "Come on," she said. "Let's leave the rest for tomorrow. I think we've disturbed enough ghosts for one night." I hesitated, looking at her outstretched hand. Her fingers were long and slender, the nails short and clean. It was a capable, kind hand. Taking it felt like a monumental step, a concession I wasn't sure I was ready to make. But the thought of staying down there in the dark, alone with my own ghosts, was worse. I took her hand. Her skin was warm, her grip firm and gentle. She pulled me to my feet easily. She let go as soon as I was steady, but the feeling of her touch lingered on my palm, a small, warm imprint that I could feel long after we'd climbed the stairs and locked the shop door behind us, stepping out into the cool, silent night. That night, something shifted irrevocably. The bridge of shared vulnerability had been crossed. Lena now held a piece of my story, a fractured, incomplete piece, but a piece nonetheless. And in return, she began to share parts of her own. It happened in fragments, in the quiet moments between shelving books or during a slow afternoon lull. She told me about growing up in a house so full of books there was barely room for furniture. She talked about her father, a quiet man who taught her how to bind books by hand, a skill she still practiced. She spoke of her dream to one day own a small bindery, a place where she could give old books new life. Her stories weren't dramatic or tragic. They were like her, quiet, steady, and grounded in a love for simple, tangible things. With every story she shared, the space between us shrank. The air, once charged with my own guardedness, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a fragile, tentative curiosity. I started looking forward to our overlapping shifts. I found myself inventing reasons to be near the counter when she was there, asking unnecessary questions about ordering or stock, just to hear her low, calm voice. My internal battle raged on, but it was a losing one. The fortress was crumbling, brick by brick, under the gentle, patient siege of her presence. My fear of being hurt again was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but another feeling was growing alongside it, something warm and bright and terrifyingly hopeful. It was the feeling of being seen. Lena saw me, not the successful lawyer I had been, or the broken wreck I had become, but the person I was right now, a quiet woman hiding in a bookstore. And she didn't seem to mind. She seemed, in her own quiet way, to like it. This new dynamic bred a different kind of tension. It wasn't the friction of avoidance anymore. It was the pull of attraction. It lived in the small spaces, the accidental touches, the moments of sustained eye contact. It was in the way my breath would catch when I'd round a corner and find her there, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, a small secret smile on her lips. It was in the way she'd hand me a cup of tea, her fingers brushing mine, sending a jolt up my arm that was as potent as a shot of espresso. I became a scholar of her micro-expressions, the subtle shift of her lips, the slight widening of her eyes. I was obsessed with the geography of her face, the slope of her nose, the single mole just above her jawline. My thoughts were a constant humming loop of her. Lena, Lena, Lena. The sound of her name in my mind was both a prayer and a curse. I was terrified of what was happening, of the slow, inexorable slide back towards a cliff I had already thrown myself from once. My relationship with Chloe had started with this same intoxicating buzz, this same obsessive focus. But this felt different. Where Chloe's energy had been a wildfire, demanding all the oxygen in the room, Lena's was like the steady, quiet glow of embers. It didn't consume. It warmed. It didn't demand. It invited. The difference was subtle but profound, and it was the only thing that kept me from running again. The turn, when it came, was as quiet and momentous as everything else about her. We were in the poetry section, a cramped alcove at the back of the store. Mr. Abernathy had ordered a new collection by a local poet, and we were trying to make space for it on the overcrowded shelves. I was on a small stepladder, trying to shift a row of heavy anthologies on the top shelf. Lena was below me, handing books up to me. "Okay, I think I can fit one more," I said, my arms straining. "Here," she said, holding up a slim volume of Mary Oliver. I reached down for it, my fingers clumsy with fatigue. As I took it from her, my foot slipped on the rung. I wasn't going to fall, not really, but I wobbled, letting out a small, startled gasp. Instantly, Lena's hands were on my waist, steadying me. Her touch was firm, sure. It wasn't a fleeting brush of fingers. It was the solid, grounding pressure of her palms against the thin cotton of my shirt. Time seemed to slow down, to thicken like honey. I froze, my hand still holding the book, my body held fast by hers. I looked down. She was looking up at me, her face just inches from my knees. Her moss-green eyes were wide, and for the first time I saw something in them that wasn't just calm understanding. It was the same humming electric current that was thrumming through my own veins. It was raw, undisguised want. The world narrowed to the space between us. I could feel the heat of her palms through my shirt. I could see the faint silvery scar that cut through her left eyebrow. I could smell her scent, that intoxicating mix of sandalwood and old paper, so strongly it felt like I was breathing her in. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic wild bird. My entire being screamed at me to pull away, to make a joke, to break the spell. But I couldn't move. I was pinned by her gaze, by the shocking, undeniable truth of the moment. She wanted me, and God help me, I wanted her too. The moment stretched for an eternity, a silent conversation happening in the space of a single, shared breath. Then, as slowly as she had touched me, she let go. She took a half step back, her hands dropping to her sides, but she didn't look away. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. "Yes," I breathed, the word feeling hollow and inadequate. "Fine, thank you." I climbed down from the ladder on shaky legs. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I placed the book on the shelf with a trembling hand and turned, busying myself with straightening a stack of paperbacks that were already perfectly aligned. The silence in the alcove was deafening. It was no longer the comfortable, companionable silence we had shared before. It was charged, heavy, filled with everything that had just passed between us, everything that had gone unsaid. The recognition of our mutual attraction was now a living thing in the room with us, a third presence that made the small space feel even smaller. I had spent months trying to convince myself that what I felt was a fluke, an anomaly, a phantom limb ache from a past life. But I couldn't deny it anymore. What I felt for Lena was real. And judging by the look in her eyes, she felt it too. The fortress hadn't just been breached. Its foundations had been shaken to the core. The question was no longer if it would fall, but when. After that day in the poetry alcove, the air in the bookstore became so thick with unspoken things, it felt hard to breathe. Every interaction, no matter how mundane, was layered with a new, dangerous significance. When she passed me a pen, our fingers would brush, and I'd feel the spark all the way to my shoulder. When we stood side by side at the counter, I was acutely aware of the inches between us, of the warmth radiating from her body. I started wearing a specific perfume, a light citrus scent, hoping she would notice, and then hating myself for the juvenile impulse. My internal monologue was a chaotic mess of yearning and panic. One moment, I'd be fantasizing about what it would feel like to kiss her, to tangle my fingers in that perpetually loose knot of her hair. The next, I'd be flooded with the cold, sick memory of Chloe's rage, the screaming fights, the way love could curdle into poison. The whiplash was exhausting. Lena, for her part, remained outwardly calm, but I could see the change in her, too. Her quiet observations of me became more frequent, her gaze lingering a second longer than necessary. She started finding small reasons to bring me things. A cup of tea just the way I liked it, a pastry from the bakery down the street. They were small offerings, peace treaties in our silent war of attrition. We were circling each other, two planets caught in a gravitational pull, slowly, inevitably, spiraling closer. The sky seemed to sense the building pressure. For days, it had been a heavy, bruised gray, the air cold and damp. The weather forecast warned of a major snowstorm, the biggest of the season, set to hit late Friday afternoon. Mr. Abernathy, whose only fear greater than an unbalanced ledger was being trapped in the store overnight, announced he was leaving early to beat the traffic, a laughable concept in our sleepy town. "You two will be fine to close up, won't you?" he'd said, already halfway out the door. "Just lock up tight when you're done." And so, we were left alone again, with the wind beginning to howl outside and the first fat, wet snowflakes splattering against the large front window. By 5 o'clock, the flurries had turned into a blinding horizontal blizzard. The streetlights outside cast a hazy orange glow on the swirling white. The few customers we'd had all day had long since scurried home. It was just us. "It's really coming down," Lena said, peering out the window. Her reflection stared back at her, a ghostly image superimposed over the storm. "Looks like Mr. Abernathy made the right call," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was starting to beat a little faster. The store, our sanctuary, was quickly becoming our cage. The world outside was being erased by the snow. An hour later, it was official. The snow was a thick, impenetrable blanket. The roads were impassable. My phone buzzed with an alert from the county. A state of emergency had been declared. All residents were to stay indoors. We were trapped. "Well," Lena said, turning from the window, a wry, resigned smile on her face, "I hope you like my company." "It's growing on me," I admitted, the honesty surprising me. A real smile, small but genuine, touched my lips. The tension of the past week seemed to dissipate, replaced by a strange sense of unreality, of camaraderie in the face of our shared predicament. The storm had made the decision for us. There was no escape, no running. There was only here and now, and the howling wind outside. "I guess we should make the best of it," Lena said. "I'll put the kettle on. I think there are some emergency biscuits in the back." "Emergency biscuits?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a thing?" "In Mr. Abernathy's world it is," she laughed, and the sound echoed in the empty store, warm and clear. "They're probably from 1998, but they're biscuits." As she disappeared into the small break room, my phone buzzed again. It was my sister, Maya. I sighed and answered, bracing myself. "Alara, are you okay? I saw the storm warning for your area." Maya's voice was a high-pitched whirlwind of concern, a stark contrast to the quiet of the bookstore. "I'm fine, Maya. I'm just stuck at work." "Stuck? Oh, you poor thing. All alone in that dusty old place?" "I'm not alone," I said, my eyes drifting towards the break room. "My coworker is here with me." There was a pause. "Oh, is he nice?" The casual assumption, the easy heteronormativity of it, grated on my already frayed nerves. "She," I corrected her, my voice sharper than I intended. "Her name is Lena." "Oh, well, that's nice," Maya said, her tone shifting. I could picture her expression, the slight frown of confusion. Maya knew about Chloe, of course. She had been the one to help me pack my things, to listen to my tearful, incoherent rants. But she had always treated it like a phase, a tragic, dramatic detour before I got back on the right path. Her solution was always the same. You know, when you get back on your feet, my friend Sarah has a brother who's a doctor. He's very stable. You should let me set you up. Maya, I just worry about you, Alara, she cut in, her voice softening into that infuriatingly patronizing tone. After everything, I just want you to be happy, to find a nice, simple, easy love. You deserve that. Easy. The word was a slap. She meant a man. She meant a life that didn't involve the complications, the judgment, the heartbreak I had experienced with Chloe. She meant a life that wasn't mine. I have to go, I said, my throat tight. My phone is dying. It was a lie, but it was the only escape I could think of. Okay, sweetie, stay safe. Call me when you get home and think about Sarah's brother. I hung up without replying, a familiar, helpless anger churning in my stomach. I stood there in the silence, the phone heavy in my hand, the ghost of my sister's words echoing in the air. Easy, love. The phrase was an insult. It implied my love, the love I was capable of, the love I had felt, was inherently difficult, wrong, a problem, to be solved. Lena reappeared, holding 2 steaming mugs. She stopped when she saw my face. Her smile faded. Everything all right? I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, the anger giving way to a sudden, overwhelming wave of despair. The fight just felt so endless. The fight with myself, the fight with the world, the fight with the well-meaning people who loved me but would never, ever understand. Lena set the mugs down on the counter. She didn't press me. She just stood there waiting. And in her quiet, patient silence, the dam I had so carefully constructed for a year finally, spectacularly, broke. No, I whispered, the sound raw and broken. Nothing is all right. A single hot tear escaped and tracked a path down my cheek. I angrily wiped it away, but another followed, and then another. I turned away from her mortified, my shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. I felt a deep, profound shame to be so broken, so utterly undone, in front of her. I expected her to retreat, to give me the space I so clearly wasn't giving myself. Instead, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Alara. Her voice was impossibly soft. It's okay. No, it's not. I choked out, unable to look at her. You don't understand. No one understands. Then help me, she said, her voice still quiet but firm. Help me understand. I turned to face her then, my face a mess of tears, my defenses completely gone. The look in her eyes was one of such profound, open-hearted empathy, it stole the breath from my lungs. There was no judgment, no pity. Just her, looking at me, seeing all of it. My last relationship, I started, my voice trembling. It was with a woman. Her name was Chloe. And she destroyed me. She told me she loved me, and then she used that love to control every part of my life. When I tried to leave, she burned everything to the ground. My career, my friendships, me. She made me believe that this, I gestured vaguely between us, at the unspoken thing in the air, that loving a woman was a path to ruin, that it was inherently broken. And my family, they just want me to find an easy love. They want me to be someone I'm not. And I came here to hide from all of it, to hide from myself. And then you showed up, and you're so kind and patient. And I'm so terrified because I feel it all starting again. And I can't survive that a second time. The confession hung in the silent store, raw and bleeding. I had laid my entire broken, terrified heart at her feet. I watched her face, waiting for the flicker of fear, of disgust, of pity. I saw none of it. She listened to every word, her gaze never leaving mine. When I finished, she slowly raised her hand and gently, so gently cupped my face. Her thumb stroked away a tear from my cheek. Her touch was everything. It was warmth. It was safety. It was acceptance. "Alara," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "what you had with her, that wasn't love. That was a cage. And your family, they're afraid of what they don't understand. But none of that," she shook her head, her eyes burning into mine, "none of that has anything to do with you and me." She searched my eyes, a question in her own. "This doesn't have to be a path to ruin," she whispered. "It could be a path to something else, something good." My breath hitched. The world had shrunk to the space of her palm against my skin, the mossy green of her eyes, the warm, steady scent of her. The howling of the wind outside was a distant echo. The ghosts of Chloe and my family and my own fear faded into the background. There was only Lena and the promise of something good. And in that moment, I believed her. I leaned in, a slow, deliberate movement, closing the small distance between us. Her eyes fluttered shut. My lips met hers. It wasn't a desperate, frantic kiss. It was a question. It was a surrender. It was soft and tentative and tasted of tea and salt and a year's worth of unshed tears. She responded instantly, her lips parting slightly against mine, her other hand coming up to cradle the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my hair. The kiss deepened, becoming something more sure, more certain. It was a kiss of profound, staggering relief. It was the feeling of coming home after a long, brutal journey. It was the feeling of a fortress, finally, joyfully, letting down its drawbridge. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was found. The world outside could rage all it wanted. We were safe in our sanctuary of paper and ink, two stories finally beginning on the same page. The morning broke, quiet and unnaturally bright. The storm had passed, leaving the world hushed and buried under a thick, pristine blanket of white. Sunlight streamed through the bookstore's front window, refracting off the snow and filling the space with a dazzling, clean light. It felt like the first day of a new world. I woke up on the worn velvet couch in Mr. Abernathy's office, a heavy wool blanket tucked around me. For a disoriented second, I didn't know where I was. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back. The storm, my sister's phone call, the confession, the kiss. Oh God, the kiss. I sat up, my heart doing a nervous flutter. Lena was asleep in the old armchair across from me, her head tilted at an awkward angle, her dark hair having finally escaped its knot and fanning out across the back of the chair. She looked younger in her sleep, her face peaceful and unguarded. A stray curl had fallen across her forehead, and I had the sudden overwhelming urge to reach out and brush it away. I curled my fingers into my palm instead. What now? What were we now? Coworkers who had shared a desperate, storm-induced moment? Or something more? The fear, my old familiar companion, began to stir in the pit of my stomach. As if sensing my turmoil, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the bright light. Her gaze found mine, and for a moment, the space between us was filled with a fragile, uncertain silence. Then, a slow, sleepy smile spread across her face. It reached her eyes. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. She sat up, stretching her arms over her head with a soft groan. "I think I'm permanently shaped like this armchair now." She looked at me, her expression soft and a little shy. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, and the startling thing was, it was true. The usual morning after wave of anxiety and regret was absent. In its place was a quiet, humming warmth. "Are you?" "I am," she echoed, her smile widening. The awkwardness I had dreaded simply wasn't there. The intimacy of the night before hadn't evaporated in the light of day. It had settled, transformed into something solid and real between us. "So," I began, needing to name it, to make sure it was real. "About last night," she met my gaze directly, her own clear and steady. "I'm not sorry about last night, Alara. Are you?" "No," I said, the word coming out with a rush of relief. "No, I'm not sorry at all." She stood up and walked over to the couch, sitting on the edge near my feet. She didn't touch me, but her proximity was a comfort. "This is a weird place to start something," she said, gesturing vaguely at the book-lined office. "And we're coworkers. It's complicated." "I know," I said, my heart sinking a little. "But," she continued, her eyes finding mine again, "I don't want last night to be the end of it. I want to see where this goes, outside of this place." She took a small, steadying breath. "I want to take you to dinner. A real date. Somewhere without a single dusty book in sight." The directness of it, the simple, clear intention, was so different from the games and manipulations of my past. It was a straightforward question, an open door. There was no pressure, no hidden meaning, just an invitation. A wave of something warm and bright washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears to my eyes. It was hope. "I would love that," I said, my voice thick. "I would love that very much." A few days later, the snow had mostly melted, leaving the world clean and glistening. The bookstore was back to its normal quiet rhythm, but for me, everything had changed. The space no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a beginning. The air between Lena and me was still charged, but it was a happy, expectant energy now, the quiet hum of a shared secret. We would catch each other's eye across the store, and a slow, private smile would pass between us. The fear was still there, a faint whisper in the back of my mind. But for the first time in a very long time, another voice was louder. It was a voice that sounded a lot like Lena's, telling me that this could be something good. That evening, as I locked the door to the last page, I didn't feel the familiar pang of loneliness I usually did when leaving my sanctuary. I felt a flutter of anticipation. I was meeting Lena for dinner in an hour. I was stepping out of the pages of my old story and into the blank waiting pages of a new one. I didn't know how it would end. I didn't know if it would be easy, as my sister would say, but looking up at the clear star-filled sky, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it would be real. And for the first time in forever, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. When you've been convinced that a part of your heart is a liability, a source of inevitable pain, how do you ever find the courage to offer it to someone again? If you've enjoyed this story of rediscovering love and trust, please give it a like o Coworkers Coworkers. Subscribe for more stories about finding your way, and share your thoughts in the comments below.